Thanks, Josh. Item X, establish property tax rate parameters for 2019 budget, presented by Steve Bard.
Thank you. Every year about this time, I come before the council asking for your direction in terms of the upcoming budget for setting the property tax. Obviously, you haven't seen any numbers at this point, so it's hard to know where we're headed. But it's not early anymore. Starting in about a week or two, actually starting right about now, our staff is beginning to work on putting together the proposed 2019 budget. You won't see it until the fall, but there's a lot of work that goes into it, getting it to that point. And one of the things as I work with staff and department heads that comes up is, what might the tax rate be? And for nearly a decade, starting before I got here, the tax rate in the city was held flat. And now for the last 5 years, there have been what I would call nominal increases, such that over that 5-year period, the tax rate has increased a total of 2.8%. So typically it's been 0.4, 0.5, whatever percent that we've increased it to try and keep up with some of the increasing costs, be they inflationary or otherwise. So I just want to kind of highlight this and kind of walk you through options that you might give me direction in working with our staff. The first one would be to have the same tax levy as last year. And for people watching at home as well, thinking, what's a tax levy compared to a tax rate? The tax levy is the amount of money we collect from the citizens every year through taxes. So theoretically, what we'd be saying is we're going to collect the same dollar amount as we did in 2018. So if the assessed value of property in the city goes up by 1% or 1.5%, we'd actually be lowering the tax rate with the goal of collecting the exact same dollar amount as last year. The next thing you could look at is to keep the tax rate flat. In that case, you would likely be collecting at least some additional income to put towards city services because of the fact that, as I said, we typically see slight increases in property valuation, somewhere in the 1% to 2% category. So there'd be a little bit of a bump up for inflation. The next one, which we've done, I think, for the last 5 years, has been an increase of up to 0.5%. So in other words, 3 to 5 cents. Again, we're at $9.20 right now on our city tax rate, which means if you own a $100,000 house, theoretically, all things being equal, and there's some credits to factor in, but theoretically, you would be paying $920 in city tax right now. So if we looked at that slight increase of 3 to 5 cents, you can figure it out for yourself. That would be another, again, $3 to $5 on a house of $100,000. The next one, which is what we did last year, we went up to 0.96, so just under 1%, and that would bring us from $9.20 to roughly $9.29 per thousand of value. And the final one would be to go to whatever the state says we can do under levy limits, which is variable. It depends. I mean, it's based on a formula, and certainly we want to qualify for expenditure restraint, which means by keeping our budget within a certain parameter set by the state, we qualify to get a piece of a larger pie the coming year. For us, it's been roughly $400,000, and I don't think we want to give up $400,000 in a future year by not qualifying for expenditure restraint. Last year, if we'd done the full amount that the state would have allowed, we could have increased our tax rate by 4%. Certainly, I'm not advocating that. I didn't last year, and I wouldn't this year. So what I'm looking for is some discussion and direction as to where you want to see the tax rate parameter. Just because you say a certain number doesn't mean we'll necessarily go to that, but it tells us what you're willing to consider when we get to September and October. I will tell you this. I'm a fiscal conservative by nature, always have been. But we have, by embracing a new compensation plan, by setting out a fairly aggressive approach for what we would like to do in street repairs and maintenance, I mean, there's costs. There are costs, and we've left some money on the table in past years by having a flat tax rate for almost 10 years, which is kind of, I think, part of what we've been catching up on a little bit the last few years. So with that in mind, I looked for, again, some guidance, some direction, some thoughts as to where you think the parameters ought to be for 2019 budget.
All right, so is there a motion to approve the tax rate parameters for the 2019 budget? Mr. Earl, is there a second?
What's the motion? He's got to pick one.
Yeah, what are you picking?
Pick a number.
Yeah, well, I don't even know if I need a motion as much as consensus, but a motion would be good. But I'm trying to find out where they would come in. Would it be, 0.5% or nothing, or 1% or more? What do they think that we ought to be looking at?
Mr. McSwain.
Yeah, a question. The dividend from the utility, that has been part of the budget?
Well, that does go toward the general revenue, and it will go up a little bit in 2019. 2019. We've been told that.
We do know that we will have that dividend for next year.
Oh, there's a dividend and there's a pilot. The pilot payment is what they make based upon the asset value of their assets at utilities. That's a formula. They can't cut that even if they wanted to, and that amount is going to go up for 2019 because the value of their assets has gone up. The dividend payment is something that's being discussed right now by utilities and others. That's about $200,000 to $250,000 they provide for economic development. That is theirs to control. They could give the city same amount. They could give the city less. But that's not a general fund item. That part is an economic development fund item. The pilot goes into the general revenue of the city.
Okay, so the dividend wouldn't enter into what we're dealing with here at all.
Not directly. If Marshfield Utilities told us tomorrow that they are going to reduce the dividend significantly, we'd have to look at what we do. Right now, the Economic Development Board funds a number of activities out of that. They would have to decide if they're just going to cut those back, if they're going to come and ask for additional funds from the city to try and make up the gap on some of those projects. It would definitely hurt. We hope that doesn't happen. But that ultimately is the discretion of the Utilities Commission.
But don't they have a plan to reinvest those dividends in infrastructure in the coming years?
Marshfield Utilities?
Yeah.
My understanding right now is that they've used or are using a consultant to look at if they didn't give the city the dividend, what else could they do with that money? What would be other uses they could make for their ratepayers that would be beneficial compared to the value of the economic development investment? But again, I don't believe they've made any decisions at this point.
Further discussion? Mr. Jokic.
Well, I'll go out on a limb, and I would like to see us look at option 5. I thought that's what I had recommended last year. Apparently, that isn't the case. This doesn't make a requirement that we're going to get to that level. But it leaves open options for staff to look at things a little more creatively. We do have some challenges, especially with the compensation plan. And some, with the police radio, that whole situation. A little known project called the pool. Not to repeat myself, but the pool's important. So I would like to see us look at option 5.
Is that a motion?
Is that a motion?
I can put it in the form of a motion, sure.
Is a motion? Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Mr. Earl, discussion?
Yeah, I think that the things that were already mentioned, I was thinking those same things. I don't believe that we're spending too much on the streets. There was a referendum that was proposed and it failed. And one of the things I heard was that if it was so important, why didn't the council devote the tax revenues to it? They said that's your job. So that's one of the things that I heard. So I'd add that to the considerations that were already brought up.
Mr. Witzel.
I've heard a lot of concerns from citizens about tax rates continually going up, and the message that I'm hearing is that they're frustrated with continually going up. And if I remember correctly, last budget season, even though we had put in a recommendation for the 1%, I believe that the actual budget came in at 1.9, and we had to do a lot of arm wrestling to bring it down below 1.
Yep.
And so it seemed to me like we gave a little and there was an attempt to take a lot, and that concerns me a little bit there as well.
Steve.
Yeah, I wouldn't characterize it as that we attempted to take more than you requested. It was a challenging budget, and to be honest with you, this one's going to be a challenging budget too. Starting with the compensation plan, which you've embraced, which is going to have some bumps this next year with some of the adjustments to people who are deemed to be behind, and those types of things, and other pressures that we've had too, as far as the cost of some of the street projects and some of the other things we're trying to get done. So When we came to you at 1.9 or something last year, when I brought that to you, it wasn't because I wanted to. It was because I was having a hard time getting down to 1, and I remember talking to the mayor about it, and he said, well, let's, that wasn't your intent, but let's deal with it. And I'm not really sure what it's going to look like this year. I mean, I'll try and carve every dollar out I can to try and pare it back. But there are some pressures growing, and some of it has been because the increases over the past 12, 13 years have been collectively minimal, which, probably made a lot of our residents happy, and yet now it makes it a little bit more difficult to balance.
Mr. Fire.
If we would have had a slight increase the last 15 years, we wouldn't be in the boat we're in now. And with the compensation package coming the way it is, you're going to find out it's going to be tough to make this work. I've got a lot of my constituents are the elderly, and I never hear them complain about the tax rate. And I've had some say you should always have a little bit of an increase, makes it better than none. And we're paying the fiddler now. Mike Braham told us 10 years ago, eventually this is going to come to get us, and it's come to the point where it's going to cost us money. And you can't just keep not raising because you're not going to stay with the program.
Mrs. Spiros.
Okay, so I have a couple questions. How many years have we raised in a row now?
I believe 5 totaling 2.8% for those 5 years
So
collectively.
we've raised for 5 years in a row.
Yes.
Okay. Number 2, option number 5 as suggested. I know you wouldn't know it specifically, but last year it would have been a 4.5% increase. So on a home for $100,000, our rate was $895 or is $912. I mean, I think
It's
right?
$920 now.
$920
now.
So it let's say it was 4.5% again. The state maximum allow was 4.5. What would that go up to?
Yeah, that'll bring you up to close to $960.
Okay.
And truthfully, I think that was kind of an anomaly. I don't think that typically under state levy limits that you would be able to at the most do that in a normal year. I can't remember why that was, but typically with state levy limits the way they are, I don't think they'd probably let you go more than closer to 3% in a typical year. I'm not sure why it was 4-point-something% last year.
But we don't know. So,
Correct.
So at that from 920 to 960, dollar-wise, how much is that? Somebody got a calculator. I don't have a calculator. Sorry.
Again, it's $40 on a $100,000 house,
$40
and it's just multiplying by 100 or 1,000.
$40 on $100,000. Yeah, break.
I've been saying that for years.
Did you have a follow-up, Mrs. Spiros?
Yeah,
No.
$200,000.
No, Mr. Budke.
$80.
Yeah, what Mr. Fire was referring to, and Becky asked the question about how many years have we raised it. Well, it was 8 to 10 years we didn't raise it. And that's what Mike's referring to, how Mr. Braham stated that's going to come back to bite us. Now, we certainly can't, I don't like tax rates, nobody to have a higher tax rate. But with all the things that we want to get done, we have to. How are you going to do it without? You can't fix roads. You're going to keep getting farther and farther behind. Now we're living on trying to overlay a lot of streets rather than complete reconstruction. And in the long run, you're going to pay more doing it that way. It's going to get you by a few years, but we have to. I mean, you talk about the pool, for example. Where are you going to get the money for all of these things if we don't start raising a little bit? So I don't like that we have to do it, but I'm going to vote for doing the motion that was suggested.
Mr. Jokic.
Yeah, this isn't, we're not saying that this will be the case, but this allows the staff and the administration to be creative with getting to a realistic point, so we don't find ourselves having to scrape back and forth. And even at 960, we're still less than what we were at in the late 1990s.
If I'm reading this correctly, we've gone up over the last 5 years, 17 cents. over the last 5 years. Is
It was
that
before
correct?
last year, and then last year was another 8, so it's
Another 8.
25 cents in 5 years.
25 cents over 5 years, and now we're proposing to go 40 cents. In essence. Up to 40, yes.
Right.
But
Or thereabouts.
Or is that not right, Steve? I mean,
No.
Based upon,
I'm
based
just
upon,
looking at this just from a tax perspective
Whatever
of,
the state allows.
I think we have to come to a point in the city where we need to stop this deferred maintenance stuff. Because as Mr. Fire said, we went through many years where we didn't do anything, and it sure looked good during those years.
Yep.
And now we're to the point where we have to make the tough decisions.
Right.
And I don't think that's a very tough decision. So I hear what you're saying. There is a point that you have to do it, but it's very frustrating being new to look at all this deferred maintenance that now we're going to have to do, and the citizens are going to be upset, and they should be. This makes no sense.
let me assure you too, as the person responsible ultimately for preparing the budget to bring to you, that whatever you give me tonight as guidelines, or even if you don't actually agree on an alternative and I'm just taking your temperature, I'd like you to agree on one of these options, but if you don't, no matter what that percentage is that you're authorizing, I'm going to be working diligently through all August and the first half of September at least, looking at every line, every budget, trying to find ways to save to make this work. So I'm going to do the same job that I would do regardless. I don't want to bring you an increase any higher than I have to. I just need to know what you're willing to consider before I step up to the podium in October and present.
Mr. McSwain.
You're not going to have bathrooms. You're not going to have a pool. We might as well just quit any discussions about that stuff. We might as well talk about what would happen if we win the lottery, if we're not willing to raise taxes. If we're not willing to take the bite as politicians, then we can never go to anybody and ask for a referendum for anything. We won't have any credibility. If we want to show people that we are positive about our city, we are investing in the city when we're spending money on it. This money isn't being used to make statues to us or anything. We're investing in it. The streets, there's a lot of evidence here about what happens when you delay maintenance on your streets. Your money spent early is an investment. There's a lot of things we do where we spend the money early and it's an investment that pays off in the long run. The sooner a street is taken care of, the higher it goes. It goes 3, 4. At one point, I saw a chart that said $1 spent here saves 6 to 10 spent here. So in the long run, you're gonna be making money. You can always cut people's taxes.
Well, you can, but Mrs. Spiros.
You can, but you never do. My issue is that this always falls on the homeowners of Marshfield. You got people who rent and rent and rent and rent, and they stay renting, or you have executives of your companies or your physicians of your hospital that move just out of the city limits and don't pay a thing. That's my concern. The people who live here are an aging population. They've owned their homes for years, and they continue to accept the responsibility for everything. While we have all these people who come here, how much does our traffic increase during the day? They come here, they drive on our roads, they use our facilities, they don't pay a stinking dime. That's my number one first concern with this. My second concern is that we continually bid out projects. We continually go over budget on our projects. That's where I would like to see things improve in this city, is for us to bid a project out and stay within budget. For once, I'd like us to stay within budget.
Mr. Earl.
Some of these people that live outside of town are some of the bigger donors for some of these projects, the library being one, some of the other things that we've done, the university. So it isn't that they aren't, it's true they aren't doing it on an annual basis, but they are providing needed money for some of these big things. And I would imagine that they'll be providing money for the pool in addition to what's going on out at the senior high. So I think looking at this maybe the wrong way. Sure, I would like to put a toll road on everything coming into town and we could tax that, but that isn't going to happen either. So I think we should be grateful for the money that we are getting from them and find a way to work with the people that we have in town.
Any further discussion? Mr. Budke?
I would just say, Steve said it earlier, we're just giving Steve an idea, and when it comes budget time, I guess, Steve, you're the only new one, McSwain, you're the only new one on, but you have a kick at it when it comes to budget time. If you get the votes, you can cut something out or add something or whatever you want to do. So Steve said it's not like this is the end of it. It's, you do have a kick at it, and I'm going to be looking at, I got a lot of ideas for different cuts, and I'm sure other people do so too. So that's where it's at. We're not making a motion to approve anything that your taxes are going to go way up or anything. That's not the case.
But we are making there's a motion right now on number 5, which is
recommendation.
A recommendation up to the maximum, which is 4.5%, and that is what will be told to the public.
Well, good.
And I do believe that, and I'm going to echo what Mr. Fire said again because it really gets me. We've had so many different things. Our payroll situation, this building has so much deferred maintenance. And I will tell you, I'm committed, and I know you all are too, that we have to stop with the deferred maintenance stuff and kicking it down the road to make it look good. I mean, we're to the point, just like families out there on a day-to-day basis, they just can't keep kicking everything down the road. But there's sure a lot of that's been done. And I think now, unfortunately, we're the ones that are going to have to take the hit for that. I don't think that's right. But that's life. Mr. Zaleski.
Yeah, and Mr. Mayor, I agree with your frustration. As you know, I'm with you on that for sure. Just a point of clarification. The 4.5% that we see in here is an example. It's not. Right. It is not a hard and steadfast number at all. It could be 1%. Right. It could be 12%. This is just a scenario from last year.
Yeah, it won't be 12%, I guarantee you. Under state levy, well, I know, under state levy limits, it'll never get anywhere near there. I was surprised to see 4.5 last year. It'll likely be less, but yeah, it'll be something in that 3 to 4.
This is a scenario, though, is what I'm saying. It is not a number that we should stick our hat on.
Yep. You are correct. It is a scenario, but you can imagine what the headlines are going to be tomorrow with where this is going to go. What we're trying to do is give Steve and the other folks that put this together parameters so they can work and they could do. And but the bottom line is we have to fix all this deferred maintenance in so many different departments in this building, and now we're asking that for the property owners in Marshfield. So, please.
I think we should put that number 5 out there and put it in the paper and let people know, and then they can call us and say, I don't want my taxes going up that much. Let's find out what they're really saying, and don't take 2%. We need about 30% to tell us they're not happy. It was 2% is not a good number of 19,000. So we need about 20% of the people saying, I don't think that's a good number. Because let's get the true number out there and see maybe what we're proposing isn't wrong. Because they're driving on bad roads. That's a known fact.
Right. I just think that we all need to be committed as the elected officials that we are going to stop this practice of kicking the can down the road, and we are going to do what these people elect us to do. We're in charge of their funds, and we need to do it right, my opinion. So should we, the motion is for number 5. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yep.
As a parameter.
Use the board.
Yeah, use the board, please.